Omar, are you okay with getting started?
Yeah, I'm happy to start anytime.
Okay, perfect. So we're gonna get started, everyone. Again, we are Solidarity ND. We do a lot of like leftist organizing, activism on campus. So if you're interested in that, you should get involved with us. We have some upcoming events that are very exciting that we will announce at the very end. But for now, we will introduce Omar Haramy, who is joining us today as the director of Sabil. We are like extremely grateful that he could be here with us today talking about liberation theology in Palestine. And I'll have you take it away, Omar.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be with you today, and I really appreciate the time and the invitation. I mean, the time that the participants have dedicated to. I know you're students and you have plenty of stuff that you need to do. Most likely, you're behind some of the classwork that you have to do. So I appreciate making some time to listen to the narrative of Palestinian liberation theology, and also, especially, I mean, at a time where there is so much violence taking place here in Palestine and Israel. There's plenty of stuff that you are already aware of if you're watching the news. It's not a difficult topic to encounter over the news. There's been plenty of actions around the world, plenty of media coverage, and there's different narratives. I'm sure many of you have listened and have encountered so many different narratives that sometimes it might get you confused. Similar to many cultures, in the Middle East, we have a character. And this character is actually, there's some debate, scholars believe is actually either a made-up character, an imaginary character, or actually an actual person who lived at a certain time in the Middle East, most likely in Iraq. This person is called Juha. So children love him, but also older people love him. So he's a person that we use to say stories. And some of the stories actually reflect that Juha is actually an idiot and doesn't really know what he's doing, and he's just somebody that, it's a funny guy. Or Juha is actually one of the wisest people that we have within our society. So it depends on the stories, and some of the stories are funny, some of the stories are actually pretty sad. So if people, some of you who have been doing lots of reading, I'm sure have read some of his stories. There's a famous story for Juha that gets taught in our schools, and almost everybody in the Middle East, but especially here in Palestine, are aware of. And the story goes that Juha, with his wife and their son, they were on a donkey and on a journey. And through this journey, they were moving from one village to another. And the first village that they encounter is actually that the three of them are on a donkey. And the people of the village come out and they say, it's how inhumane of you. Three of you riding on a donkey, the poor animal. We defend, we stand, we have a strong position on animal rights. We do not accept or tolerate the abuse of animals. So, feeling ashamed, Juha, his wife, and their child get off the donkey, and they start walking, and they reach another village. The next village, again, the people come out and they start laughing at them. You say, it's a hot day. The three of you are walking, and you have a donkey. A donkey is a means of transportation. You're not using him. You're not using the donkey. You're foolish. So they decide to put the child on the donkey, and they continue walking to the next village. And in the next village, the people come out and they say, this is what's wrong with the new generation. You don't respect your parents. Why is the child on a donkey and his parents are walking? That is unacceptable. And you can imagine, you can just keep shifting the roles. At the end, to satisfy the people, is actually the three family members carry the donkey. And as they're walking into the next village carrying the donkey, the people come out and they say, a stupid family. Walking and carrying the donkey does not make any sense. So actually, it's impossible for a Palestinian or an Israeli or any person just to come and present a situation as it is. There's so much narratives, and it all depends and are relevant to the context of each person sharing the story. However, to make life easier, and I believe that there should be certain standards, and we deal with facts, and we deal with that we have to make certain compromises, and we have to generalize. So nothing that I would say is a completely accurate or reflects the perspective of every Palestinian or every Christian, but just to be aware that everything's very relevant and there are many different stories. So when we say Sabil, my name is Omar Haramy. I'm the current director of the Center for Palestinian Liberation and Theology in Palestine and Israel, which many people, to avoid controversial issues, just refer to it as the Holy Land, or more accurately, if you want to make it more theologically accurate, you'd say the land of the Holy One, because land cannot be really holy, but only one God, the Creator, is holy from the perspective of many people of the faith. So if you have been to Jerusalem and you visited Jerusalem, you must buy. Many of the souvenir shops would sell you this cross, which is called the Jerusalem cross. And there's multiple interpretations of it. The one that I like is that this is the cross of Jesus, the cross of Jerusalem. And it brings together the four Christian families. And the four Christian families are the Catholic Church, so all churches that refer to the Pope as their highest authority. There is the Orthodox Church, so like the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Roman Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox. There is also the Eastern Orthodox or Oriental Orthodox churches, like the Copts, Ethiopians, Armenians, Chaldeans. And there are the Protestant churches, either whether they are the High Church or charismatic Christians. So these are, in general, many also scholars would refer, these are the four Christian families. And actually, all of these Christian families are represented are present in the Holy Land with different percentages. Most of the majority belong either to the Catholic or the Orthodox Church. But we as a Christian community, we are divided into two categories. So there is the indigenous church, a church that has, which is the Palestinian church as we use it, we refer to it. And we mean indigenous is the church that has a continued presence from the time of Pentecost, from the time of, from the early church until this time. There has been a non-stop presence of Christians in the Holy Land. At certain times, it was less than in the hundreds, and in the end, it was the majority of the people, and it became smaller percentages. So it really depends on the era. And we Palestinian Christians are located into Israel, which is this area, Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem is part of the West Bank. And in the diaspora, there's around 200,000 Palestinian Christians living inside the whole Holy Land, which is a combination of Palestine and Israel, according to international law. However, which makes us less than 1% of the Palestinian population. However, we Palestinian Christians are close to 10 to 12% of the entire Palestinian population. 1 out of every 2 Palestinians in the US is a Palestinian Christian. 90% of the Palestinians in Latin America are Palestinian Christians, and it really goes back into different percentages. So on average, there's almost 1.5 million Palestinian Christians, which is around 12% of the entire Palestinian population. But it's not only Palestinian Christians who live, the indigenous Christians. And when I say Palestinian, it's very important. You need to understand that Palestinian could mean the majority. Yes, we are Arab Christians, but we also have different ethnicities like Assyrian, Syrian, Coptic, Armenian, Ethiopian, which they are Palestinian Christians, but ethnically they are not Arab. And similar, there's the Israeli church or the new church. And this is what we would say is the Hebrew-speaking church. So there is a percentage of it are Messianic Jews, Jews who have converted or have accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior. There are many Jews, many Israelis who come from a background from the ex-Soviet countries, as towards the end of the Soviet Union or immediately after the end of the Soviet era. Many people moved from the Soviet Union to Israel, claiming that they were Jews, but actually they were benefiting from a special program that Israel established to bring Jews back home, as they've announced. But actually they were Christians or practicing Christians, and they came just for economical reasons. And there are over 100,000 people. There are the Ethiopian Christians, the same thing. Israel tried to bring many Ethiopians who claim that they were Jews, but actually they are Christians and still practicing Christians. There's a big percentage of expatriates, mainly from people who work in the medical sector inside Israel. And there are the spouses of Israeli Jews. So an Israeli Jew gets married to an American Christian. She comes and she's still practicing, or he's still practicing Christianity, and they live in the Holy Land. So mainly they are, it's a new church, and around, I would say around 200,000 Christians, Israeli Christians, non-Palestinian, live inside Israel. Now, the indigenous church, so the new church is a pretty new church, less than 30 or 40 years old. There hasn't been much studies on it. There has some papers that have been prepared, but that's a different topic. The early Christian church went through, the Palestinian church has gone through so many important stages. The first stages, of course, which has really shaped who the church is, it was the very tough early persecution by beginning by the Jewish community. Many Jews saw this emerging new theology, new sect coming up, sounded very weird, did certain weird practices. So the first resistance to the church came from the Jewish community, later on to the Roman Empire with lots of persecution, and that has really shaped the character of our local church. Different from countries where the church historically, it's the government or the nation adopted Christianity, and it became immediately the predominant religion. We are a church that is, the early persecution plays a very big part in who we are. Still, I mean, there has been very tough theological disputes inside the church and debates, which are reflected in the early councils, but this still breaks. The divisions in Jerusalem are very, very serious and continue to be very strict, and this plays very much into the character of the church. In the early 7th century, there was the Persian occupation of, I mean, part of the Roman-Persian War. The Persians took over many parts of the Holy Land, and they destroyed 90% or 99% of the churches, burning the books, destroying our Christian heritage. And that had a very major impact, a catastrophe for local Christians. The coming of Islam also was a major game changer. No longer the rulers of the land were on the same faith of the people of the land, and the rulers of the land are from a different religion, and was very active in promoting a different religion, and this has really affected how the composition of Palestinian Christians. However, until the coming of the Crusades, most of the country remained Christian. Close to 90% or 85% of the country remained Christian, and there was a certain understanding that the people remained Christian, they had to pay whatever they had to pay or do whatever they had to do, and most of the country was but the rulers were Muslims. Within the coming of Islam, when the Crusades started, serious tension started to erupt. Not only, but I mean, it really took a different level, and it broke an understanding that was reached by the churches in the East and the Muslim rulers. Because in many cases, many of the local Christians cooperated with the Crusaders. There has been a number of crusades that took place. It's a long history by itself. And from that time, the relationship between the local churches and the Muslim rulers deteriorated, and also with the Muslim between the Muslim world and the Christian Western world. But until the beginning of last century, and up till 1948, where 1948 is an important country in our recent, an important date in our recent history. Of course, for Israelis, Jewish Israelis, it's an important year. It's the year of independence, where Jews from around the world, they eventually established a country that they call home, and it's the state of Israel, especially after going through the Holocaust and continuous persecution, sadly, in Europe, mainly in Europe, but in different parts of the world too, including the Middle East and other parts of the world. They have a country where they no longer have to be a minority. For us Palestinians, we call it Nakba. Literally, it means catastrophe, disaster. Because in 1948, 2/3 of our historical Palestine became a completely different country. It became a state of Israel. 2/3 of our people became refugees. It's impossible to meet a single Palestinian without without that Palestinian not being either a total refugee, a descendant of refugees, or at least one of his parents is a refugee. So that had a major impact on us. We lost our heritage. We lost our country. We lost our connections with our families, with our neighbors. We had an identity crisis, and so on. But specifically for us as Palestinian Christians, we had a faith nakba. We Palestinian Christians, because for us, it's not only that we were being dispossessed by our country, we were also dispossessed of our faith. We felt that somebody was stealing the Bible from us, because the same Bible that we used and read and we worshipped in the churches with was the same book and tool that was used to justify our dispossession, that it is God's will for the Jewish people to come back home. God has promised this land for somebody else, and we are an obstacle or a challenge to the fulfillment of prophecies. So we became the people who were very proud to have a continuous presence, to witness the miracles of Jesus, to witness and to be with the church. Despite of all of these challenges throughout these centuries, we became an obstacle, and the Bible that used to connect us and comfort us with God was the same tool that was being used to dispossess us. And that's why many Palestinian Christians went through a faith crisis, faith nakba, as we call it. Some felt that they had either one out of two options. One is to deny their faith and to say, I can no longer believe in such a God who that justifies my oppression and my dispossession. Or somebody else said, I will be a Christian, but I need to abandon that. I need to abandon Palestine. So I need to either immigrate physically from the country and just live as a Christian in anywhere around the world, or mentally and psychologically debate. Others went through this trying to keep a balance between, being a Christian on Sunday and holidays, but the rest of the week they have to be Palestinian, even if they did not want to be Palestinian. Definitely living in a conflict zone under the Israeli occupation. Most of us in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, we were always reminded that we are Palestinians because we cannot have access of freedom, access of movement, freedom of worship. You don't have the right to marry whoever you want unless you have the right paperwork, and you need always a military permit. and a permission from the Israeli occupation to practice where you work, where you study. If you get a driving license, if you get a social security, even if you open a bank account, our lives are completely controlled by the Israeli military occupation. And this is why many of us Palestinian Christians, we started to ask questions. What does it really mean to be a Palestinian and a Christian at the same time? And especially if you look at this timeline, it's a very simplistic way just to speak about what is happening in Palestine and what continues to happen in Palestine, historical Palestine. So the first one just shows how historical Palestine, it was a predominantly a Palestinian people. 5% were indigenous Palestinian Jews, similar as the Palestinian indigenous Christians, who were 10 to 15%, and similar to the indigenous Muslims and Samaritans and Baha'i. There is like 12 faiths that live in the Holy Land. So forever, Palestine, historical Palestine has been a diverse and a mosaic place where people live. We are located between 3 different continents: Europe, Africa, Asia. It's an important part of the Fertile Crescent. It's the cradle of civilization. The weather is amazing. Whatever you plant grows. So it gives us so much time. There's always an abundance of food, unlike, sadly, the engineered famine that is taking place at the moment in Gaza. Because it's very rarely in our history we go through famines and lack and no access to food, unless it is actually, sadly, human engineered famine. Whatever we plant grows. So when you don't have to be like running around, the bushes to gather food or to hunt animals, you have plenty of time. And when you have plenty of time, you build civilizations. You start speaking with one another, and then you think, we're living together, so we need to arrange how we live together. What values do we abide with? Is it the survival for the fittest? Is it the survival of the kindest? Do we serve one another? Are we kind with one another? So there's lots of trial and error, and it's also time to ask questions. Why are we here? Who created us? What's the purpose of life? And life became very different at the beginning of the last century, because it's tens of thousands of Jewish refugees who were fleeing serious persecution in Europe by Nazi Europe. Concentration camps, the violence is very serious, and people were fleeing. Most of those people they were fleeing for their lives, who were coming from Europe to the shores of historical Palestine. They wanted a safe place to stay, not very much into within a doctrine of establishing a new country. But for us, really, as a people, you can look at, I'm not in the United States, but I follow the news. There's so much debate. Should we open the borders? Should we close the borders? Should we build walls? Every country should have the right to decide what borders and how to deal with the foreigners trying to come in. I'm a person who doesn't believe in nationalism. I do not believe in borders. I would encourage to live in a world where we are all living in humanity. But that would be a bit naive to think that the whole world believes the same way. And some people were really scared and afraid, and some people were very welcoming of the victims of Europe. But it doesn't give you lots of comfort to be a victim of a victim. And as normally, it's like there's a story in the Bible where, two mothers are debating, and this is my child or not my child, and the wise judge says, let's split the baby in two, and the real mother says no. And we use this in Palestinian liberation theology to come and say, we, the ones who said we will not split historical Palestine, because it's similar to the story of the mother who did not want her baby to be split. But In 1948, we, the indigenous people, were not able to fight and defend our country, and we lost 78% of historical Palestine. And we can debate the pros and the cons of international law, but international law decided that these would be the borders of 1967 that would divide what would be the state of Israel and what would be the Palestinian state. Again, in 1967, there was the second occupation where Israel launched a war. And today, there isn't any, it's like more like a Swiss cheese. We all live in small areas, neighborhoods. You have to cross multiple checkpoints just to move from one location to another. All of our communities are surrounded by Israeli Jewish settlers, which contradict international law. Israel decided to move over close to 1 million settlers with weapons into our communities, and they take over most of 78% of or 80% of the land resources, water resources, and we, the people, are very much dispossessed. So Palestinian liberation theology came into the logic of to strengthen and to strengthen the faith of the local Christians. So what does it really mean to be a person of faith? What does it really mean to be a Christian? There's, of course, if you want to take it into the dogmatic, and what is your sources of scripture? What do you read? How do you interpret? That's all fine. But if you want to simplify it, as simple people, as Palestinian Christians, we read the Bible and we saw that there is always, through the teachings of Jesus, who is in Christianity the Alpha and the Omega, is the beginning and the end. There is always almost in every sentence in the four Gospels, there's an emphasis on three important values, and whether we like them or not. The first value is inclusivity, that we are all God's children. There's no preference of one group over another, and no group is worse than another. We are all God's creation. We are all created by God with the same rights. So that is, it's full stop. That's the way who God created it. I wish to be the preferred, to belong to the preferred group to God. I wish that God would, be more biased towards me in so many different ways. But I mean, I'm no different from my brother or my sister or other members in my family or in my community or on this earth, regardless of what is my faith, color of skin, sexual orientation, gender, and whatever background I have, it is irrelevant. We are all God's children. The second part is justice. It's very difficult to be faithful to God if you're not a prophetic voice for justice and peace. Always Jesus goes and pursues justice, and justice is more into the restorative justice. Jesus wants us, God wants us to come together. The lamb and the lion, to be able to come together. And for people to come together, they need that. It's fundamental to have justice. It's important and a necessity, and its life is very difficult without justice. And the third principle that is very much echoed in all scripture in the New Testament, it is the nonviolence. It is almost impossible to, if there is blood that needs to be shed, it should be our blood. This is the way of Jesus. This is the way of the cross. That is fundamental for us as Christians. I know there are different Christian theological schools, and sadly, many of the wars of the world, if not most of the wars of the world, were started by Christians. But you cannot justify it scripture-wise. You cannot justify it through the early church. There are other ways to justify it. I don't think that's the way of the early church. That's the way of Jesus. Or I know for a fact that is not the case. And these are the important three pillars for us, how to apply them. So for us as Palestinian Christians today, and there's serious, since October 7th. I mean, it's this 2023 was the most violent year since 20 years. And I'm saying pre-October October 7th. October 7th, things just deteriorated to the worst levels possible. Now you didn't need to be a prophet to prophesize that things are gonna that things would reach this place. And I think that things will get even much worse unless there is seriousness of the international community to come and say, we as humanity, we have reached a level as civilizations that we need to respect international law and the implementation of United Nations resolutions. And all countries, whether you're an empire or you're a small country, a developing country, we all abide to the same values and to the same rules. Otherwise, law would make no sense at all. So there is a way to move forward, but there isn't much political will, sadly. And I know that everybody is consumed with internal struggles that they are going through. The US itself is extremely divided. You're you're part of an election year. It's almost impossible to have a conversation without fighting with one another. Everybody is exhausted and tired, and people are just, feel overwhelmed. We all feel overwhelmed. So what's the solution? That's the question that we try to do, and that to ask one another. And I believe it's standing for what is right and defending human rights, and putting our foot down. We have to speak truth to power, and we have to challenge all of the structures that are justifying the loss of innocent life. In this talk, I tried to be very brief within the time that was given to me, and I wanted to touch on multiple points. And I prefer just answering questions or having discussions.
Well, thank you, Omar, for your wonderful talk and your very powerful closing statement. I think we'll open up to the audience for the first question, and then if maybe the conversation's a bit slow, I can also ask the questions that were submitted to me. So does anyone in the audience have anything they want to ask Omar? Yeah, thank you. You can just come here, the mic is here, and just introduce yourself.
Hi, Omar. Thank you so much for coming and doing this. My name's Gavin. I had a question about conversation about the faith Nakba. So you kind of presented two options. You could either abandon your faith or abandon your country. And I was wondering if kind of through just reading about the event, if you've had any experience seeing where actually this type of event strengthened their identity as Palestinian and also strengthened their identity as a Christian. Thank you.
I studied at a Quaker school. Thank you. I went to the Friends Boys School. It's an American Christian Quaker school. And I grew up during the first Intifada during the 1988-89. And at that time I was like 9 years old, 10 years old. And actually that was the first encounter for me with death. A young student, somebody that I knew, we used to play soccer at that time together, was arrested and was tortured and was killed by the Israeli army after a demonstration. So that was our first encounter, my first encounter with the faith Takbir. I am also I'm from Jerusalem, and my church, my family has its strong heritage and history in Jerusalem. According to tradition, my family is the first family, part of the first 5 families that became converted entirely to Christianity on Pentecost. And part of the school education, we had a missionary, a wonderful older woman, white American older woman. She came and she was fixed on teaching us the generation of Nakba, Intifada, the ones who were throwing stones. And I also had my role and my share in throwing stones at the Israeli army. That she was trying to convince us that this is not our land, but this land is for the Jewish people. And within the Palestinian old system, in the examination on the last day of school, we were always challenging her, and she would say, you know, this God gave this land to the Jewish people, and we say, no, this is our land. We've been here for thousands of years. My family is 2,000 years old. How dare you? And you know, for us, it was very emotional because we were at the school where we had the Palestinian child being shot and killed. It created so much trauma and has played very much in our identity. And I remember within the Palestinian system, you have to pass every subject to pass the whole year. Otherwise, you have to repeat the whole year. And for the final exam, it was 100 marks that if we do not answer it, we will fail. And she said, God promised this land to blank. And that was like a simple question. And I still remember, you know, the debate that was taking place in that, because when we read it, some of the, you know, young kids, they said, oh, that's an easy A+. We'll write whatever this crazy woman wants and we'll finish with it. And others started to say, you know, if we do it, we deny we betray the blood of Amjad, our friend who was shot and killed by the Israeli army. You know, we're not gonna write, and this is bullying, and this is unacceptable. And I remember at that time we had a very much, we had a debate, and she started shouting at us, and then we went and we had a demonstration in front of the principal's office. You know, just for the context, we were at maximum 10 to 11 years old at that age. So we were like little kids, you know, and it was our first encounter with a Christian Zionist. So we went and we had a demonstration, and you know, our class is divided, half Muslim, half Christian. And the Muslim students were finishing their exams, and they would come and they say, why are you doing a demonstration, you know, or a protest? And I remember we were like 12, 13 kids. We were all embarrassed to say why we were standing, because she was using the Bible to justify our dispossession and the suffering that we went through. And I would say that 80% of us, the young kids at school, because our school was adjacent to the Israeli police station, the military police station, and almost on at least once a week, we would be bullied by these soldiers. And I mean, these soldiers were also like 18-year-old kids. We also had idiots in our school who were 18-year-old kids and who were bullies. But there was a principal, there was a system to defend us from these bullies, while the bullies within they were the ones with guns, and they are the ones who controlled the city that we lived in. They could also bully our principal and our teachers and our families. And at that time, it was very difficult for us. You know, do we surrender that the Bible justifies our dispossession, or do we find a way to figure it? And we were a generation in 1987, 88, which is, we had the same questions that my grandmother had. My grandmother was a very devout. She passed away 20 years ago, 18 years ago. And she was a very devout Christian. She knew most of the Bible by heart, at least the Gospel of Mark and Luke. She knew them by heart. And for her, she couldn't really, she couldn't grasp, you know, she was an Anglican Episcopalian, and she couldn't really grasp how the churches were, from the Anglican Church, were celebrating and rejoicing in 1948 took place. Her own community, because she lost her family, she lost her church, she lost her community in 1948, and she was left with a depressed husband and a baby. My father was born in 1948, and for her it was a catastrophe of a Nakba. So we were always struggling between our Palestinian identity, especially that we're very much Palestinian. We love Palestinian food, we love Palestinian recipes, We like to sleep in the evening. We like to speak and debate and have loud conversations like everybody in the Middle East. But we are also very proud of being Christian. You know, it's not an easy neighborhood in the Middle East or in the world, or it's not easy to be a minority anywhere in the world. And we were proud to be a minority, but we were proud to be a Christian minority, remaining steadfast with our faith, and being present in the city of Jerusalem, waiting around the empty grave and the tomb for Jesus to come back. So that is like, it's always been this challenge until Palestinian liberation theology came and said it is okay to articulate a theology. It's okay to be a Palestinian, it's okay to be a Christian. It does not, one does not contradict each other. Exactly this, and actually it makes us a very unique and special community. It's exactly how it is. It's okay to be an American and to be a Christian. And it's okay to be a Canadian, to be a Christian. And it's okay to be a Mexican or a Filipino or a Russian or a German, and so on.
Thank you, Omar, for your response, and Gavin for your question. Also, I forgot to say, if you're on Zoom and you have a question, you can submit it in the chat box and I'll be checking. Is there anyone else in the audience? Okay. Go ahead. Where is? Oh, that's right.
Okay. Hi, Omar. I'm Magdalena. I'm from Chile. I mentioned this because I think we have the biggest Palestinian community outside the East. So we are we're in solidarity with you. I just wanted to mention that. And I have a question. I study theology, and I wonder how you approach, you said something before, but how you approach the Old Testament, especially the first books, or all these texts that some people may use to justify this occupation. I wonder how you approach that. And I also wonder if you have some authors that are especially meaningful for you and for this construction of Palestinian liberation theology. If you could share that with us.
So the Bible is a big book, and I mean the Old Testament is also, or the Hebrew Bible is also big, and it's actually, when you have such a big book, you can make any argument you want and find scripture or material to justify it. This does not only apply to the Bible, but to every faith community. So it really depends, as the church has always been looking through different ways and different lenses at the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures. I belong, for example, to the Greek Orthodox Church, and the Greek Orthodox Church looks at the Hebrew scriptures as literally only books, only fulfillment prophecies that have been fulfilled by the coming of Jesus. So all of the purpose of the Old Testament is only just to show direction for the coming of Jesus, God becoming flesh and living among us. Other churches look at it or interpretations look at it as literally as a history book. It's a bit more challenging, you know, to look at it as a history book, because I don't think it is a history book, at least within our understanding of what a history book is written now. There's certain criteria for writing a history book, and I don't think that the authors who were writing it were writing actually history, but they were speaking about a spiritual journey, and to the understanding of the people who were writing it at that time. And there's plenty of people who have done ways to look at it. So it's others, they say that this is actually, you cannot read one section and ignore it from another section. So if you're reading into the Hebrew scriptures or into the Bible as a whole, you can see that the human mind is growing. It's becoming bigger and more capable to absorb the concept of God, the Creator, which is, according to the Christian faith, becomes more evident and clear with the coming of Jesus. So that is like, it's the mystery of God becomes clearer, or we become closer to the mystery of God within the coming of Jesus. So you can see that there is a progression within the coming of between the writers of the Bible. So it is like for us, we write that the prophet Jeremiah, the prophet Jonah. Sorry, the prophet Jonah is the first Palestinian liberation theology, and us as Sabil, our co-founder, the father of Palestinian liberation theology, who is still alive and still present and still around us, Reverend Naim Atiq, within his amazing books, Justice and Only Justice, Palestinian Liberation Theology, and others, are excellent books and tools. But we are very grateful as Palestinian Christians. We have so many amazing theologians. We have people like Munder Ishaq, Mitr Rahib, Patriarch Michel Sabah, Bishop Atallah Hanna, Father Fadi Diab, Bishop Jamal Khadr. We are a small community, but we have, I would say that we have dozens of amazing and incredible theologians who have, if you take it into percentage-wise with any population in the world, by far we Palestinians are the biggest percentage of theologians in anywhere in the world.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Magdalena, for your question. I think we have 2 questions in chat, so we'll probably take about 2 to 3 more and then might conclude there. Oh, it's only 1. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. We have a question from Fabrice who's asking, he says, hello, Omar, thank you for your talk. You talked about the manipulation of Palestinian history and education with an example from your youth and your white American teacher. Could you speak on the current state of education history in Palestine and efforts to reclaim it? How have these efforts faced pushback?
So you see, there's so many restrictions for us as Palestinian Christians. One restriction is that we live, I mean, we are controlled by 2 undemocratic, I would say, governments, whether it is the Palestinian establishment, the government, the Palestinian Authority, or the Israeli government. Neither of them are genuinely democratic or believes in a pluralistic and diverse cultures. So we are living as a minority in an unfriendly governments that are actually undemocratic and rely on a system that oppresses the people that they control. But in addition, we Palestinians, out of the 13 churches, we have 11 churches, the major churches, that the leadership is not indigenous. They are people who do not speak Arabic, who were not brought up in Palestine, do not understand our culture or our narrative, and they are the ones that also dictate of how and what we say inside our churches. So a government that is against us, and also a church hierarchy that is against us. You know, it's in many countries, or at least within the Orthodox Church, we call it the grandmother or the theology. It's where the grandmothers and the mothers teach the communities of what really does it mean to be a Christian, because it's not into this. The government doesn't provide us with this education, nor does it come from our churches. And really, what does it really mean to be a person of faith, and what does it really require? And it's basic values. I think it's as we've summarized it. First of all, treat people as you like to be treated. Have an understanding that God is good, and God is just and cares for the creation, and has not only created us just to enslave us. And always love one another. And what I mean by loving one another, it's never give up on the humanity of your neighbor, even if that your neighbor is your oppressor. And these things, it's really, you don't need a theological education to deal with it. You know, as you find these values common with people who haven't really went to a seminary, and people who haven't done in-depth research into their faith. But this is like principles, how we treat one another. And if we have these bonds and relationships with one another, we become a community and we become very resilient and able to challenge empires. And this is how the church has been always, by true community love, we were able to overthrow the most powerful empires throughout history.
Thank you both for the question and the response. We have a question from someone in the chat asking, hi Omar, thanks so much for speaking with us. You mentioned how the Anglican Episcopal Church as an institution was in favor of the creation of the State of Israel, while your Anglican Episcopal grandmother did not. Has public support of Israel by various Christian denominations resulted in Palestinian Christians distancing themselves from institutional Christianity and becoming more non-denominational, meaning they feel let down / lack of trust in organized Christian institutions?
So thank you. There's this term that we use is called Christian Zionism, and it means Christians who support the Zionist narrative. And actually, they're not. It's not like a simple group. Actually, it's a combination of different groups, and everyone has their own intentions. The first Christian Zionists who supported the establishment of the State of Israel were actually anti-Semitic group of people who thought that we don't want to use the same model that Hitler had, just kill the Jews, but why don't we give them a country to live in? And that's a way to get that they no longer be our neighbors, but have a country on their own. Lord Balfour, who created the famous Balfour Declaration, was himself as an anti-Semite through many of his scripture, many of his writings. So that's the first group. The second group is actually a group of people who just supported Israel, the creation of Israel, because they are naive Christians, simple Christians. You know, that's the word Israel is in the Bible. Oh, I mean, it's having a simple understanding. So that is also a reason of those people. Another group of Christian Zionists is actually, and I would think the most dangerous is that they think that this is like that's the way to Armageddon. So they are it's part of their end time theology, the fulfillment of prophecies that we need to build the temple. Jews have to return back, not because they really like Israel or they like the Jewish people, but that's the way to bring Jesus back. 2/3 of the Jews will have to be killed, and 1/3 or slaughtered, and 1/3 will convert to Christianity and will be raptured with Jesus. Then we have a normal group of, other group of is normal people who just believe that the enemy of the world today are the Muslims, are the Arabs, are the people in the Orient, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Christian Zionism has different aspects. And we as Palestinian Christians, we deal with each Palestine, at least within Palestinian liberation theology, we deal with each group in a different way. So yes, we reject all forms of anti-Semitism, and we think that hatred and prejudice of the Jewish people against the Jewish people is a sin. It's part of the sin of the church. So we believe that the people who claim to be Christian Zionists are actually the enemies of the Jewish people, if anti-Semitism is what drives them. We don't believe that we are in an eternal war with Muslims or with a specific group of people, and we don't believe in this concept is that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We believe we are all friends, and we need to convert people who are our enemies to become our friends. We believe that the prophecies it's like at the end of Revelation. It's the New Jerusalem where everybody lives in harmony. Logically, if you want people to live in harmony, the way towards it is not war and conflict and slaughtering people. It's actually the path of justice, doing justice and kindness and forgiveness. This is how you bring the kingdom of God together. It's not by slaughtering each other and subjugating a specific group of people and dehumanizing another group of people. And I mean, that's how we deal with Christian Zionism and within the aspects that are taking place.
Along a similar vein, there was a question that was submitted to us that I think is really relevant to our position as an American university. The question is, a lot of American Christians align with Israel due to the false conflation of the Israel of the Bible and the modern state of Israel. Can you provide a bit of background on the difference and provide insight as to how we can challenge these narratives?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very simplistic understanding. I've mentioned that that's like why some group of people, they think because of there are some resemblance. There's nothing that is connected with my family is, as I said, we are Christian, but we've been in Jerusalem for 2000 years, uninterrupted. And actually, our background is from a Jewish background. And that's the case of most Palestinians. Most of the Palestinians either go back to either being from a Jewish background or from a Gentile background. So, I mean, at least what we're speaking with ethnically. There is no relationship between the biblical Israel and the modern state Israel. That's a fact. I don't think that anybody um, anybody with a simplistic knowledge or a basic knowledge of the Bible or of theology or of scripture would make this connection. It is done only among simple people. All they have to do is just do a little bit of reading. There is a plenty of material available. One, I think if people would want to do something that is more for lay people and simplified, the Church of Scotland released a number of years a small booklet, a small paper document. They refer to many of our material in it. It's called The Inheritance of Abraham. And they address the topic of biblical Israel and today's Israel and the concept of, it's the most simplistic and naive understanding and misinformation when it comes to the between these two connections. You can find it online. It's a very simple and easy to read document. One more document would be also the Kairos Palestine document. It's the document by Palestinian Christians and theologians, and we address also these issues together. I'm also proud to be part of the steering committee of the Kairos Palestine movement, which is inspired by the South African movement. You can also find it online and in multiple languages.
Right, does anyone else have any questions in the audience? Oh, perfect.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Just hearing the other questions made me kind of think of my own question here relating to like the Old Testament we had and like the previous question on American University. So, what kind of things can ND students and staff and faculty who are Christians and Catholics like keep in mind when we're critiquing Israel? And like, what can we keep in mind when, for example, we're asking like Father Jenkins for a commitment to making concrete action steps, right? So like many students from other universities across the country have asked for a divestment resolution be passed by the university's board of trustees. And do you have any advice for students working towards Palestine liberation in navigating very Christian spaces? Maybe some conservatives who are still like quoting the theological gymnastics to justify Israeli hardware against Palestinians. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it is I mean, first of all, we appreciate all of the solidarity that is being shown all around the world for us as Palestinians. But I think it's a very important distinction that people need to make. We are not asking people to be pro-Palestinian or anti-Israeli. That needs to be very clear. And I don't want people to be driven to come and defend Palestinian rights because they are pro-Palestinian or anti-Israeli. That's not the cause at all. The cause is, do you believe in human rights or not? And you have to be defending human rights regardless of the identity of the people, of the victims or the victimizers. That's as simple as it is. We don't need to make it it's not a national struggle. And I don't think that we as that the incentive for us to be involved, to be that what drives us is just to be a pro-Palestinian. It's fine if you want to do it, but I don't think that you can justify it from a Christian perspective. And I don't honestly think that this is what we are asking. We're asking that churches, organizations, groups, whatever, individuals, they abide with these values, because we are all brothers and sisters around the world in humanity, and we need to defend these values. Now, I would say that it's because we believe in one another and in the same values, we need to use positive resistance. And I mean, it is what I mean by positive and popular resistance. It is all tools of nonviolence. Now, nonviolence makes more sense, because if we're going to ask you, pick up arms and fight for us, it's going to be like 1 in a million who's able to do this, or 1 in 100, let's say. The majority of the people don't have the interest or have the training to carry weapons. The second part is actually it's stupid to fight and to use violence, because it's Israel and the US and its allies are superpowers, and they have nuclear weapons. It's not going to end well. The third one, it helps us to seek the humanity of our oppressors when we use nonviolence. And the fourth, us as Christians, that's the way of Jesus. Boycott. For many Christians now, we are still in Lent. Some Christians are going through. Easter has arrived, and the grave is empty. He is risen. But for us who are in Lent, we boycott, or we divest, or we do not approach certain products. It does well for you. It doesn't help us as Palestinians when you divest, or you distance yourself from corrupt systems and from corrupt and evil relationships. You don't do it because you're pro-Palestinian. You do it for your own goodwill. If you want the Catholic Church to be a healthy church, or your Protestant church to be healthy, it should not be complicit in the dispossession or in the inhumane treatment of a specific group of people. The occupation of Palestine is exactly similar as child labor, as sweatshops, as violence, organized violence against women, all forms of evil behaviors. And we're just asking you, what is your position? It doesn't need to be too complicated. And you do it for yourself, not for us as Palestinians.
Does anyone else have any final questions they would like to ask? Anyone in chat? Okay, well, I guess just for the sake of time, I'll just give some concluding statements. I'd first like to thank Omar again for speaking with us. This was amazing, and I'm sure we all learned so much. I know it's late for you. I think it's like 10 p.m. for you, so this really means a lot. We are honored to be in your presence and to hear what you had to say. And we want to emphasize continued solidarity and action for Palestine beyond this event. We appreciate everyone coming out today, whether on Zoom or in person, but we must continue standing with and for Palestine, whether through our activism, our research, the classes we take here, the conversations that we have. I will send out a link on our Instagram, which is at solidarity.nd, to get involved with and donate if you can to Friends of Sabeel North America. I highly encourage you guys pursue this so we can continue working with Omar past this event. On campus, we welcome you to join us in Solidarity ND, SVP, Student Voices for Palestine, and all other groups doing amazing work locally for a liberation cause that requires international unity. Through a discussion of liberation theology, we wanted to tie together the values Notre Dame claims to uphold as a Catholic institution with the settler colonialism and genocide by Israel happening in front of us today. Inclusivity, justice, nonviolence, what Omar discussed in his presentation, these are all things that Notre Dame says that they value, but we obviously see some shortcomings in whether those are actually upheld or not. It should not be a question whether to stand with Palestine or not, and I hope we all have Palestine in our minds and hearts as we continue forward. Some quick announcements we have are just some like events Solidarity ND is planning to hold. We have Domestock, which is a radical politics, art, poetry event. It's really, really fun. It's being held off campus. We will send out the poster very soon. We'll have student bands coming to perform. We have amazing organizations, both on and off campus, coming to speak about the work that they do. As well as students presenting their own poetry. So this is all very, very exciting news. And we are creating, or we're in the process of creating our very first zine for Palestine. This is just going to be a collection of poetry, essays, art, anything that students in the tri-campus community want to submit. And we will have that printed out and available for free at Domestock. So thank you all again, and thank you, Omar. And yeah, hope you all have a wonderful day.